Hey, podcast listeners, this is your host with the most. The podcast is named after me, JJ Meets World. Today's guests include Megan, Gia, and Annie from Food of the North. This episode is a crash course in what Food of the North is and what Food of the North does. You may have previously known them as Ugly Food of the North, but get past that. We got a brand new website we're kind of driving you guys to. I think that this episode is something that you are going to appreciate. Listen to it over your lunch hour and see if you can put some of this stuff into your life right away. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. This episode of JJ Meets World is brought to you by Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty. Natalie has a proven track record to get your home sold faster and for more money. She is consistently focused on her clients' needs and wants throughout the entire process and make sure that they are well taken care of. If you're looking to buy or sell, reach out to Natalie today. On average, Natalie sells a home every 3.74 days. That's at least 2 a week. And last year, Natalie earned her clients on average over $4,000 above list price on their homes. And you don't have to take our word for it. Here's some of the great reviews Natalie has received. I was overwhelmingly impressed with Natalie and all the Hatch team. She was very responsive and responded to all of the emails within an hour. She gave great advice and encouragement from the listing and pictures, the offer, and all the closing details. The marketing team knew exactly how to promote my property, and I was pleased by how soon and easily my property received an offer. I was actually dreading selling my condo, and Natalie did such an awesome job that I felt like I really didn't need to do anything. The thing I most appreciated was that she really listened to what I wanted to do and respected my decisions. I would definitely recommend Natalie and all the Hatch Realty team. They made this process so wonderful. That was from Diane. So listen, if you're in the mood to buy or sell a home, give Natalie a call right now. You can reach her at 701-388-9338. Natalie, Natalie, at hatchrealtyfm.com, or you can go to livefargomorehead.com. That's livefargomorehead.com and find out some information. Huge thanks to Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty for sponsoring JJ Meets World.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is! He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirls as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
When I was younger, we had to bring our garbage back from the lake because we did not have rural garbage service. And my sister or myself would have to kind of argue about who was going to sit next to the garbage, because there were times where maybe like 3 weeks had gone by before we came back into town. And so you'd be sitting next to some really rank garbage. We got really good at recycling and figuring out ways that we could deal with waste that wouldn't involve us bringing back 3 or 4 bags of garbage, but a single bag of garbage. And recently in my life, I've gotten to the point of where recycling is really important to me, and I recycle as much as I can. I think the one place that recycling hasn't caught up to residential homes is in businesses. I don't see recycling being a point in as many businesses. At one point at our business, they said, well, here's a cardboard garbage can that you can throw paper products into. But then I saw our janitors just dumping both of them into the big garbage. So like, what's the point of having one or the other? But waste not, want not. The folks from Food of the North, Megan, Annie, and Gia, join us in the studio today, and we talk a lot about food waste, but Food of the North, formerly Ugly Food of the North, is so much more than that, and we get to touch on a lot of it. They have a home at Theater B doing First Fridays.
Yeah, that's how I first heard about them. What they do is once a month, the first Friday of every month, they host a get-together at Theater B called First Fridays. And then they've got speakers that come in, and it's a pretty good event.
And it starts at like 8 o'clock in the morning, right? Like you just are a little late for work that day.
You're just starting your day with it. and it's incredibly popular. And that's how I first heard about them. And I knew that Megan, Annie, and Gia were really passionate about this topic, and it shows in this conversation.
I enjoy the fact that they come along for the ride on this, and I don't feel at any point they're being preachy. They're trying to be educational. They're really trying to make sure that what part of the way we treat food in our culture is trying to break the mold of how we feel about food.
Yeah, it's certainly for people as privileged as us, it feels like we're in a post-food scarcity world, right? We just take it for granted. And that is not true for most people on this planet. And they bring up the fact that, how much food gets wasted every year, oftentimes merely for aesthetic purposes. People look at food and they think it's not attractive looking. It's perfectly usable.
After we had our conversation, I thought about how often we doll up a plate to look more attractive with food waste. So like the garnishment on there that just goes to waste. They used to be that you'd go to the Speakeasy in Moorhead and they would have a big piece of like green leafy lettuce garnish with a pickled beet, like a section of pickled beet on there. And as a kid, I never ate either of those. So if I ate at the Speakeasy 10 times in my youth, there's the equivalent of a full meal for someone that was just thrown in the garbage. Now, that's one individual. Imagine if you add up all the people throughout time.
This conversation with them also reminded me of how many bags of spinach I've let die in my fridge over the years.
Right.
And that basically when I buy spinach, it's with the intentions that I'm going to be eating healthy and all this stuff. And typically what happens is it sits in my fridge and I let it die because I have not yet adopted the good habits that they talk about in today's conversation.
And they give some pretty simple things that you can do around your household, whether you've got a family of 10 or you're a single person living by yourself. There are some really great intentional ways that you can be better about not wasting food, be better about choosing food. Just a slight bit of background on this. You should know that we did 2 food episodes back to back.
I was going to say that.
And coming out soon, you'll hear the other food episode, which is where we went to all the fast food restaurants and tried all of their breakfast sandwiches and then graded them. And so I feel bad. Like the whole time I had this guilt. Also, my stomach has just been tossing and turning all morning.
You literally took a bite out of 5 different sandwiches today, which you did not complete.
Yep. A bite out of half sandwiches.
That's true.
And to her credit, Britta, who's in that episode, took all of them home, and I think probably ate one in the car.
Right. That episode's coming out soon, but we're not programming it right next to this one.
Yeah, that'd be weird.
It'd be
a little weird. But while you're listening to this is a great episode to listen to, maybe on your way to the grocery store or while you're cruising around shopping, or if you're making a meal, to start thinking about those ways that you can reduce your food waste, increase the amount of food that your body naturally wants, and then figure out how much the portion should be on your plate. Childhood hunger is something that I am very passionate about, and it sometimes I feel can be like kind of a hot button sexy issue for people to get behind. And like, yeah, let's raise a lot of money and do this for the food bank, but they treat it as a one and done, and they don't get past it. The amount of kids out there who the only nutritious meal that they get is when they're at school because there's just not enough money to keep the food in the house that they need. It's really heartbreaking, and it also makes you think about how, and I don't want to use the term lucky you are, but how fortunate you are if you don't have to worry about where the next meal is going to come from, because that is not the way many Americans or people around the globe get to lead their lives, and that is, I can't even imagine.
Well, luckily we've got organizations like Food of the North that are trying to do something about it. So if this is a topic that you're interested in, or if it wasn't until you listen to this podcast and you get interested in it, check out Food of the North's website and social media pages, and they'll get you started.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, let's not waste any more time. Let's let Megan, Annie, and Gia tell us the story of Food of the North. So enjoy this and get some carrot sticks ready to go. I think you're going to enjoy combining this episode with some carrot sticks, maybe some celery, a leafy green, an ancient grain, whatever you're going to do.
JJ Meets World.
Welcome to the JJ Meets World Studios. I am so excited. Everyone go around and introduce yourself, please, and give like a fun fact about yourself that maybe the listener wouldn't know, even if they do know you.
Okay. I'm Megan Myrdal. I'm one of the co-founders of Food of the North. My fun fact, I'm a twin. And at the time that I was born, I was the largest twin born in Grand Forks Hospital.
Really?
Big twins.
And so, like,
I don't know if we still hold that stat, but I tell people that I was the biggest twin ever born.
I would definitely hold on to that. Like, every time you go into the clinic, like, anything we need to know about your medical past, I was the largest twin ever born at the Grand Forks Hospital.
No. Issues, health issues, no, but I was the biggest twin ever born.
Interesting. All right.
This is a fun fact. I'm Gia Rassier. I'm a co-founder of Food of the North as well. My fun fact... I was homeschooled. That's a pretty random fun fact.
Like all the way through high school?
Yes.
Did you ever take any classes like
I did take some classes, but I have 2 diplomas. One was made on Microsoft Word.
Really?
That's the one that's framed, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's good that there's templates out there for that, isn't it? So that's very cool. I had one of our previous guests, Randy Olson. Well, now Randy Heinold is.
Love her.
Was homeschooled, but then she also got to take theater classes. So she kind of got the best of all worlds.
Totally.
With that. Oh, yeah.
People don't
maybe
usually
if you did some
lead with
research on
that.
the guests, Tucker. And last but certainly not least,
I am Annie Wood. I serve on the board for Food of the North. Been able to work with Gia and Megan on some projects over the last couple years. And in January, it became official. They're like, we like you enough. You want to serve on the board?
Yeah.
I'll give you a food-related fun fact. I can actually peel a banana with my feet.
really?
True story.
Do you peel it in the way that apparently everyone's supposed to peel a banana, but none of us actually do, which
from
is
the
like,
bottom up?
Yeah.
Well, with my toes, it's easier to grab the top of the banana, so I do peel it that way.
I so wish we had a banana right now.
This is a podcast, not a TV show. So when JJ gets a TV show, I will be your first guest.
And you'll peel a banana live on the show?
I will. I have done it for talent shows. I have done it in a variety of ways, shapes, and forms. Sometimes you get kids to eat their fruits and vegetables. So
How long have you had this talent?
well, so at the lake as a child, my cousin had recently learned that monkeys peel bananas with their feet. And he was like, we should try this. So we scamper into the cabin and we steal the bananas off the counter. We go back out to the dock and we're all like smooshing bananas and trying to peel them. And my mom was so upset because we had ruined breakfast for the next day. But must be a genetic like family trait. We've all got these weird long finger toes. And so we could all do it. So there are some great photos from that day of just smooshy bananas and a lot of peels and just 8-year-olds with a lot of mashed bananas all over the dock and probably my angry mother in the background.
We had a family friend who could cut a deck of cards with one hand, which was like, you think, oh, that's not such an amazing thing. But to watch it, like how to manipulate like half a deck of cards while not like dropping them, it was just really amazing. So you and she could get together and tour that act. And I would pay money to go see that.
Isn't there like a Fargo Famous thing? Like that would be.
You should sign. The FMCT does that. Sign up next year.
I judge this year. Next year I'll be on stage.
Yeah,
with
there you go.
Most random talent. If they start giving out awards for most random talent, I'm in.
You saw the acts. Like it could be a little bit of anything. Like
True. I feel like I would need like a glittery jumpsuit to really sell the banana.
Yeah, you probably need someone in a monkey costume too, like a big gorilla costume.
Right.
And then a Chiquita Banana Gal as well.
Back my backup dancers.
We'll do that.
We'll do that.
Gia and I will.
Okay. We'll start practicing.
Our
I'll
first
limber up
TV
my
ad.
toes and, be ready. Yeah. Get a pedicure.
Nimble up.
There's a series of commercials back in the day for a restaurant in Fargo called Smokies that were the worst commercials ever. Do you remember those commercials? Anyone
I
ever
feel
see
like
those?
I was just about to sing the jingle.
Yeah, Smokies brings back the good old days.
Yes.
But I remember those vividly for the poor production quality and for the fact that they were just like, we need to make an ad. We don't need any actors. It's like, oh yeah, let's grab Jim. Jim's got an off day today. And so I feel like if you did include that in a commercial, people could be talking about it 20 years later on whatever kind of medium we're consuming at that point.
This could be the legacy I leave.
I like that we're having a brainstorming session about Annie's future career in banana
peeling.
toe peeling.
Our first television ad.
Yeah, right? It should be out there. And really, I mean, are we really producing television ads now? We're really saying we're going to make a commercial that'll be on the web, and then maybe we'll put it on KVRR at some point.
Down the road.
If we decide we've got some freebies. So let's talk about food. Let's talk about the purpose. Let's talk about the passion behind forming this organization that it used to go by a different name, correct?
It did. So we started our organization in the summer of 2015. So we're almost coming up on 5 years now, which is kind of crazy.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But we originally founded our organization as Ugly Food of the North. So about 5 years ago, the Red River Market got going up in Fargo. And for those who aren't familiar, it's a great downtown farmers market that's just become a wildly successful place for people to buy local food and a whole lot of other things. But so when that farmers market got started, we got to know some of the farmers that were selling their produce there. And we'd be chatting with them and saying like, oh my gosh, everything looks so beautiful. Your produce is so amazing. And they're like, well, this isn't everything that we grow. We like some of the stuff that comes out of our farms is really funky looking, but nobody will buy that. And so we kind of like started looking into this issue of this cosmetically imperfect produce and realized that it's like a pretty significant contributor on the food waste issue. And in the United States, 40% of food goes to waste. We don't eat our leftovers. We're poor planning on shopping. And then we also don't buy cosmetically imperfect produce. So we decided to partner up with the Red River Market and do an ugly food day at the Red River Market. So ask the farmers to bring all that funky looking produce and encourage people to buy it. And then a couple days later, we did a community potluck at Drecker Brewing and said, hey, with whatever you bought at the farmer's market, bring it to Drecker and make it into something fun and delicious and show people how good this food is and how great it can taste. And we ended up, it was supposed to be a one-time thing. We're like, let's just do a one thing at the farmer's market and then do this potluck to like bring some awareness to this issue. And it ended up being on the front page of the Fargo Forum. 100 people showed up at the potluck and we're like, oh, like this is something people are interested in and want to know more about. So we kept hosting events and a lot of them were food waste driven, but we kind of evolved to just having more conversations about food in general, asking farmers to speak about what they're growing and what they're doing, asking chefs to talk about how they're preparing food, how they're sourcing locally, how they're being sustainable, how they're addressing food waste. And we kind of just kept doing that. And in 4.5 years, we can talk a little bit more about some of our other projects, but we were pretty active and doing a lot of things. And we realized that our ugly food name didn't really capture everything that we had going on. So we rebranded about a year ago to be called Food of the North. But we still do ugly food and we still do food waste education because we had people who were like, we love the ugly food. We love your logo. And we're kind of sad when we rebranded, which was kind of interesting too, because you don't realize that people have like an affinity towards your brand, but we had a few that really cared. So we're Food of the North now.
And let's go into this. So at what point did you decide this is an ongoing project rather than just like, hey, let's get some attention right now and see if we can move forward?
Well, like Megan said, the first event, we thought it was just going to be a one-time thing, and people, like, it seemed like that space was missing for conversations about food. And so we just kind of kept having events and people kept coming. And
I'm trying to think if there was like a distinct point where like we're like, okay, this is like we formed a website at some point in there, and that was maybe like a few months in.
Yeah.
So probably like when we bought fmuglyfood.com, it was probably like October. So it's probably like 3 months into doing this.
The website is usually the point of where it's like, we're a thing now.
Yeah.
We are established.
We got an email address.
We kind of were like, it was kind of, I don't want to say the perfect storm, but like the group of people that came together around this issue, like we had a social media specialist, Gia, we had a graphic designer, Jeff Knight, and then myself, who was like a local food community person. And so like this combination, it was like supposed to be a one-time thing, but like it was just like a good skill set to get things going and get like the right combination of information, making it interesting for people, fun events, that it just it kind of took off more than we really expected.
And the timing, I think, of the market starting right at the same time, there's just an interest in local food and people wanted to be part of that conversation.
I think one of the big things, at least in the Fargo-Moorhead area, is the change where downtown became a destination, and downtown is so driven by local restaurants, local bars, and that word local becomes even more important when you're talking about food. And people want farm to fork. They want stuff that is grown in the area, especially because we have some of the best produce. There are months during the year where I think you could eat directly from the dirt almost every single day and be a very happy person because of it. But I was thinking about this. So just yesterday, as I was getting ready for this interview, I took an inventory of my fridge. And I said, okay, so what in my fridge is pretty much going to waste right now? And so I was kind of shocked at the amount of stuff that we have in there. We're a very condiment-driven household. So there's 5 different types of barbecue sauce, and then there's all of these spicy buffalo sauces and things like that. And I started looking around. I'm like, wow, we've got a lot of this stuff, and we're really rarely using any of that. And then when you look at all the products that it takes to go into that, by the time, I can't remember the last time we finished a whole bottle of, let's say, steak sauce. And so we're throwing away half of that when it's going away. When we bring leftovers home from a restaurant, the invention of the air fryer has made a big difference because I find that it's a convenient way to warm up leftovers. But there's also a significant amount of waste just in the packaging of leftovers.
Oh, yeah.
I've got a friend who brings their own Tupperware when they go out to eat.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm like, what a smart idea. Because then you can at least see through it, and you're not ending up with styrofoam at the very worst, or a giant piece of plastic, and you go out there and you've got maybe like half of a baked potato left, and they bring you a giant to-go container.
And styrofoam,
yeah,
too.
it's just the worst.
So kind of going off of some of your points related to the condiments and like the overstocked fridge, that is such a common thing you hear from folks, is that like you buy these things that you use once a month or once every 2 months, and then you go 6 months later and you look at it and it's past the expiration date. And people just assume that, because the date is past, I need to throw it away and buy something new. And that's like one of our pieces that we try to talk a lot about when we talk about food waste, is understanding the food dating system on our food items, because there is no government standard or requirement that food needs to carry a certain date. Like barbecue sauce is expired after 6 months. It is all a manufacturer's best guess of when the food will still be at the highest quality. So the expiration dates are not a safety issue, it's a quality issue. And I think that's something that is really poorly understood related to food waste. Just because something is old does not mean it's going to make you sick. Like foodborne illness and sickness is an issue of cross-contamination. Like if uncooked chicken gets close to your raw broccoli and then you eat that. But old barbecue sauce in your fridge, if you were to eat that 2 or 3 years later, it might not have the like perfect high quality freshness of when you originally bought it, but 99% of the time it is not going to make you sick. So we try to tell people like, take those dates with a grain of salt and rely a little bit on common sense, smell, sight, touch. And that is something that the food industry, and there has been some actual like policy put forward to try to change that, because it is recognized that it just confuses people. The only food that carries an expiration date that is required by government is infant formula. Other than that, everything else is a manufacturer's best guess. And like, for example, if you have eggs and you buy those, the date that you get on an egg carton, that date on there, the eggs are still good for 4 weeks past that date.
Oh, no, my wife and I just had an argument about that, and she won.
she was right.
Yeah, now I have to go home and be like,
What's your wife's name?
It was backed up, Jill.
You're welcome, Jill.
Because we have friends who have chickens, and they said, eggs keep for much longer than you would ever imagine. And so, because I was like, Jill, it says March 5th. We got to get rid of these eggs. And so, well, there you go. So she won an argument. Thank you very much. There you go. There you go.
But how many people know that? Like,
no,
that
right.
4 weeks for eggs. It's the date for this item. Like, it's just confusing. So it's just trying to tell people to, like, there's like over 50 different ways that we date food and label it, and it just is confusing. So like, I tell people, I'm like, don't try to learn it. Just use more common sense, and don't just, when you see a date, think that there's something wrong with it or that it's bad.
Well, I always used to think it was weird that like macaroni and cheese would have, like, boxed macaroni and cheese would have an expiration date. I'm like, isn't this pasta like pretty much good until the end of time?
Yeah, it's like the processed to processed food.
Yeah.
There's so many preservatives in there. It'll
And I at one point
withstand
had heard,
the apocalypse.
one of the thoughts behind this is probably an old wives' tale, but like the packaging starts to like break down, and you're not really working on the food anymore. It's the fact that it's being stored in this type of a plastic bottle, and the plastic itself is letting off that weird gas or whatever it does, and so you're consuming something that's not supposed to be like that. So maybe if you just took it and put it into a better container, you'd be fine and good to go.
Well, like canned goods, they carry a 2-year expiration date, but like canned food lasts indefinitely. And like it's all partly packaging, partly the way it's processed, partly the like combination of ingredients and what it all means together. And I shouldn't be so cavalier to be like, everything is fine, just eat anything regardless of what the date is. Like, that's being maybe a little...
Well, like you said, use your best common judgment. If you open it up and these green peas are radiating an orange glow, you probably shouldn't be eating them anymore.
Well, like sour milk, for example. Like, obviously, when milk has gone bad, it smells, like gives off that. But like, if you drink sour milk, it doesn't make you sick. It doesn't taste good, but you can use that in pancakes, and like it still has function and use. It just doesn't have that typical milk taste and quality that you would enjoy on a sweet cereal. But
now, in my bachelor days, I had a gallon of milk that was half drank that I did not touch for a long time, and the gallon itself expanded because the milk was gassing itself.
Ooh.
And so I did not drink that.
Good call.
That was almost a year past
Common
the date on it.
sense.
yeah.
Right,
You
exactly.
got some.
Didn't even bother to pour it out the drain. Took it straight out to the dumpster and poured it in there, and then went over to the recycling area. So when it comes to food and food waste, I'm amazed because it seems like in 2 generations, we have completely flipped the way we treat food. Mm-hmm. My grandparents never threw away any food. If we had potato chips that went stale, they rebaked them, and they extended the life on that. My grandmother canned like there was no tomorrow so that nothing from her garden went to waste. And then in my parents' generation, I remember us once a week, we had leftover night where we consumed all the leftovers that were in the fridge. But now in my household, I definitely waste food more than either generation behind me. And it seems like that is something that has just exploded. Mm-hmm. And, it's the same thing with vacuum cleaners, right? My grandparents had my grandparents had the same vacuum cleaner for 50 years. And when it broke, they took it in and got it repaired. I can't tell you the last time I took a vacuum cleaner that I bought for $25 and got it repaired. I was like, no, I'll get a new vacuum cleaner if this one stops working. I burnt out the motor on it. And so what do you think was the change? What do you think has happened in our culture to create this wasteful nature? Anybody? Any swings at the fences?
Yeah, I totally resonate with all the comments that you made, because that's the same as with like how my family from different generations. So thinking back on our grandparents' generation, food scarcity to an extent, like there just wasn't as abundant of a food supply as we have today. 2, I think that our grandparents' generation had a really high appreciation for food and the value of food and what it meant and all the work that went into it. A lot more people in earlier generations had an agriculture background where they were directly involved in food production. And I think that when you are involved in the growing and harvesting and tending of food, you have a higher appreciation for it. And so the idea of throwing it away may seem a little bit more awful to you. And then also, I think just with the way society has changed, like we're a very convenience-driven society. Everything is very fast-paced. And we are definitely I shouldn't say this is like universal, but we are we have more disposable income than I think our parents or earlier generations had. And so when you're looking at food, as a lot of food is cheap. So like thinking about the different things that we buy and throwing away food versus packaging it and leftovers and then planning what to do with that leftovers, that's time that you've lost because you've had to go to the work of doing that. Whereas thinking about throwing away the food, it's like, oh, well, I'll just throw it and then it's done, versus like the effort that would have to go into saving that. But I think convenience driven society, I think that food being very cheap in a lot of ways makes it less valuable. I think less connection to food production and how we grow and how we take care of that. All of those things kind of wrap into that issue. Do you guys have comments?
So last fall at our First Fridays, which is a monthly food conversation at Theater B, we had a conversation about food preservation, and Marcus from the Clay County Historical Society shared some really interesting things with us based on victory gardens. And the big push there was nationally during some of the World War efforts to say, how can we be growing our own food in our backyards and using the land that we have? And so I think also, without some of that national conversation happening, we're missing out on pieces of that. But also, if you think about where people are living, so much more frequently, we're living in apartment buildings and those types of things where people maybe don't even have access to a backyard to have their own garden. Like I have a backyard, but I'm not super into like, how do I do all this stuff? Thankfully, my father-in-law, super into gardening. And so he comes over and is like, oh, what have you done to these tomatoes? Let me help you prune them. And like, why would you plant your carrots next to your whatever? So I think we're also, sometimes missing that educational piece generation to generation as people move around the country. I live several hours away from my parents. And so, their gardening techniques, it's hard to have them, pop down and say, oh, well, hey, this is how grandma and I used to plant the turnips. So I think there's sometimes that lack of knowledge where people don't always feel like they know where to start. And then you can go down a dark hole in the interwebs looking for the right information. And there's just so much of it. I think people get overwhelmed because we already live in a really information heavy society. So how do you know what's right and what to do? And so it's easier to say like, well, I'll just buy those cucumbers at the grocery store.
But like the idea of throwing things away, like, so my grandma, she does not throw anything. Like if there is a tiny bite of food left on her plate, she packages it up and puts it in the fridge. But then like in addition to that, any packaging that she has that things come in, she finds a use for that too. Like she is and I think that generation was driven to do that out of necessity because of being Depression era, poverty, absolutely waste nothing. Where we're seeing a shift now today where people are doing that more from like an eco-conscious sustainability. It may not be that I need to do all this saving and this thriftiness and this use of everything because I need it to survive, but I'm doing it because I recognize the environmental impact that all this has too. So we're kind of seeing, not universally, but there's definitely a generational shift now, particularly with younger folks that are just really interested in the health of the planet and what these things are doing to impact that too. So
my grandmother used to keep the like country crock butter containers from church. And so you'd look in her fridge and it'd be like 9 country crock containers. She'd be like, oh, it's in one of those. Like the leftover spaghetti's in one of those. And she'd have to open each and every one of them until you found the spaghetti
leftover
container.
Roulette.
Oh, yeah, right? You never know what you're going to get. It's a little fun roulette. Like that. Just out of curiosity, any vegetarians or vegans?
No.
No? So how do you feel about the meat industry right now?
Ooh.
I know, yeah, that's a loaded question. You didn't think we were going to get into that before the 30-minute mark, did you?
Hitting the hard ones fast. Yeah, that's a really interesting place in the food conversation today. So animal agriculture gets a lot of negative attention in terms of worries about climate change and carbon emissions and people maybe making a choice to eliminate or reduce their meat consumption because of the water needs, the different ways that animal and meat is produced. But I think that the most important conversation that is like wrapped into that is the plant-based movement, which is not pushing people to eliminate meat from their diet, but really thinking about that plant foods should be the center of your diet and meat should be more of an accompaniment. And how we've traditionally, particularly here in the Midwest, we've been like a meat and potatoes culture, right? Like half my plate is meat, half my plate is potatoes. And that is heavy from an environmental perspective, thinking about the inputs that go into producing those foods, but it's also really backwards from like a nutrition and health perspective too. And we know that for human health, to be able to live well, you need to be eating a lot of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and plant-based proteins like beans and lentils and garbanzo beans and all of those things. And so really encouraging people to think about those foods as the base and the bulk of your diet, because it's good for your health, it's good for the planet's health. And then using meat as more of an accompaniment for flavor or a side thing. I think the challenge with meat right now is that it isn't, I mean, people can make their decisions to be vegan, vegetarian, whatever it might be for a whole multitude of of reasons that people choose to eliminate that from their diet. But one of the biggest things is if people could just reduce their portion size of that. You go to a restaurant and it's an 8-ounce steak. Well, a portion size of steak is 3 ounces. That's what the dietary guidelines recommend is the amount of meat protein that a person would need. So just really thinking about it like more from I think if you're in a place right now where you're choosing to eliminate meat and you're following one of those diets, kudos to you. Well done. It's hopefully you're eating a lot of plant foods in those diets. But if you're not right now, maybe just think about it more from like a portion size perspective.
I think that is the exact right answer that I agree with wholeheartedly. Glad we didn't have to get into a fight on that.
Okay, good.
That's great.
One question. Have you tried the Impossible Burger?
I have.
Okay, what'd you think?
So I tried it on air during my day job.
Ooh.
And when we said we were going to taste test it, we immediately got just an onslaught of hate mail from people saying, you support this just by doing this. And, do you know what drives the economy in our state? And I said, listen, I'm not telling you that I'm going to all of a sudden be like, everyone stop eating meat. So my producer and I tried it. And what we thought at the end was, yeah, it tastes just like a cheeseburger. If you handed this to me at a cookout, I would not know the difference. When you tell me, yeah, it's plant-based, and you are thinking a little bit more while you're chewing, you'd be like, yeah, okay, I can understand this. Like, it is just it's a little bit different. But to me, I think the irony of it is I'm still sitting in a car that is, running and burning gas while I'm getting it, and it still comes in a wrapper that's not fully biodegradable, and I'm sloshing it down with a large soda. And so even though I have this new opportunity to eat something, I'm still, the sins outweigh the benefits so much in it. I haven't tried any of the home-based stuff yet, but I would gladly have an Impossible Whopper again. I just choose not to have burgers for lunch that much, so I'm a bad example.
Well, I mean, the attention that got behind when Burger King announced that they were carrying the Impossible Burger, it was like huge media news, and how excited that community was about this movement in the plant-based, plant-forward, less meat in our diet. And I wholeheartedly agree with your comments about the vehicle, the sodas, all the other things that go along with that burger. Burgers are the number one consumed food in America. Burgers or pizza, I feel like they go back and forth. So I've heard from folks that are in that reducing meat consumption area that introducing a burger like that in a venue like Burger King, it's a really positive part of the progress that they're trying to make to reduce meat consumption. But I would love to see, instead of having all those alternative products created that are like 30 ingredients and all these fillers and all these other things to try to mimic meat. Like, how about eat beans for a meal instead?
Right.
Like, beans are grown in North Dakota and they are super healthy, and the way beans are grown, they're a part of the legume family, which means that they fix nitrogen. So we have atmospheric nitrogen, which is a greenhouse gas, which is part of like the conversations around climate change. How beans are grown, they pull atmospheric nitrogen and pull it into the soil in their root system. So it actually reduces greenhouse gases while they are growing. And so you're thinking about like making that food choice. It's local. The way that it's grown is good for the planet. Like, just eat some beans and
And that comes down to convenience, right?
Totally.
So choosing to have beans for lunch is a choice that you make in the morning before you take off for work, for whatever your plan is for the day. And then all of a sudden you found out about another deadline that's coming up, and I got to eat something really quick. I know we need to eat lunch. So in my journey right now to like in weight loss, I've learned like, oh man, I don't have to eat 3 meals a day the way that I've been taught my entire life. There's a rhythm to how the body produces and how I should be eating, and having some almonds here and yogurt here. And it's more of a sustainable. There's just so much that we don't understand about the science of our bodies and the science of food, that we're in this 1950s mentality of like 3 hots. That's what you need a day. You need 3 hot meals a day. That's what is good for you. That's what's best. And you have to balance it on your plate, and your plate needs to be balanced in this way. When they switch from the food pyramid to the plate method that they teach now, I thought, well, that's so much smarter, right? Because I never eat a pyramid. I'm always eating off of a plate. But even the way we choose to consume food in the way that I can't stand paper plates. I think every time that there's cake at work for someone's birthday and they send out all these paper plates, and I think, we've got a dishwasher at our business. Why are we not using a regular plate? Why are we creating extra waste because of it? So it's not just wasting the food, but the waste that surrounds food in so many ways. I judged a chili cook-off yesterday, and they insisted on every single time a brand new plastic spoon so it wouldn't taint the next chili. And I was like, listen, I'll do a good job licking this spoon off. You don't have to worry about that. This white chicken chili is not going to affect the taste of, Brenda's 5-alarm chili. I guarantee it. But they insisted on it, and they came out in styrofoam bowls. And I just think, you could have had 3 bowls that you just washed. The first one, while I'm eating chili 2, you're washing bowl number 1. But we don't think about that, and we don't plan ahead enough. So maybe that's part of the convenience, right? Is planning ahead and making a point.
So like kind of the planning piece is one. Like, we're a convenience driven society. We want things fast. We want it convenient. What can I get quickly? What can I eat now? What's going to taste good, not cost too much? Cost, convenience, and taste. Those are like the 3 things that are the main drivers. Health is a 4th, and it's like creeping up as being a more important factor. And then we hear that people's decision making on food related to like health, sustainability, planetary health is increasingly getting to be more motivating. But for the majority of people, it is cost and convenience. So like, we really have to think about how do we make those types of foods cheap and easily accessible. And like, I don't want to say that like, oh, it's so great when not the Impossible Burger, but like a Taco Bell, for example, they have a vegetarian menu now that has a ton of bean focused options. And not saying that those are healthy, but like, you have a quick, convenient option right there that is, okay, I can go and have beans for lunch and choose a vegetarian option, and it's quick and it's convenient. So like, those places, while it might not be the most virtuous choice, it is like on a more positive line along the spectrum. And then
it's a huge step. Just like the Impossible Burger or Whopper is a huge step.
Totally is.
It's not a small regional chain that decided to get involved with it. It is a national chain that put enormous amount of dollars behind it. I am just, not only the general media consensus, but the amount of advertising they did. Also, I want to, whoever's working with Burger King right now is really knocking it out of the park in their marketing. Have you seen their latest commercial where it shows a Whopper getting moldy?
No.
It's time-lapse photography of a Whopper that within like 24 hours of serving it, it grows mold. And they said, you might think it's weird that we're showing you a moldy Whopper, but we want to show you that the products we're giving you are fresh and that they're real. Because I think we all have seen those pictures of like the McDonald's burger and fries that sat on a shelf in a testing facility for 10 years and looked the same as the day that they were served.
Yeah.
And so Burger King doubled down with like, yep, fresh ingredients, and fresh ingredients go bad.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. I have not seen that, but
And it's disgusting too. Like the look of it, like after that time is just, they let it really go to this mold city.
I did want to go back to your comment about like being at that chili feed and the disposable utensils there, and like the insisting on like you need a different bowl and a different spoon for every single time you try. And I think we go into so many, we eat all the time, right? Like we have so many decisions we make on a daily basis that have significant impacts on our health and the health of the planet, right? And when we have moments to like potentially challenge the status quo and be like, does everyone actually need a different spoon for every single time? Do we have to use styrofoam for this? Is there an option where we can find a ceramic or a glass bowl or something? When we first started doing our Food of the North, we did a lot of potlucks because we live in Fargo and that's a great way to bring people together. And we went to a thrift store and bought like 50 pieces of old dinnerware. And that's what we brought to our potlucks. And yeah, we had to go home and wash them at the end of our events, which kind of sucks sometimes. But it was kind of showing like, you can do this. It takes a little bit more work, but let's not be a disposable, throw everything away society. Let's try to use things and be conscious in that.
My cousin's company did the most amazing thing for Christmas this last year. Usually they give everyone at the business, like a bathrobe, or everyone gets some kind of corporate branded gift. But this year, everyone got a nice set of like camping silverware, and they were encouraged to keep it in their desk.
Nice.
And they said, so when when we have cake, you bring your own fork down.
That's
and then
awesome.
just, you wash it in the sink and bring it back to your desk, and it's in a nice little container. And
Cute.
He said immediately people changed the way that they treated it, because not only that, he said, you're all of a sudden seeing people bring soup from home. And the only difference between December 31st and January 1st was I have a spoon at my desk now, so it's more convenient for me to bring soup because I don't have to worry about bringing a spoon. And I thought it's a small change like that can really get people excited about making a major change in their life.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of that. Like, you mentioned that friend that brings their own Tupperware to a restaurant. A lot of people who are packing their own reusable straws and not asking for the plastic straws when they go places. And
my mother-in-law gave us some. We love them.
Yeah, it's great. And it's kind of becoming. There's definitely environments that you go into. Like, I brought a disposable or reusable straw into Buffalo Wild Wings, and I could see people were like, "What the heck is that thing?" But I think that it's becoming something that is a more maybe acceptable isn't the right word, but like it isn't as a strange of an act to do as maybe it would have been in years ago. And I'd imagine that we're only on a trajectory where you're just going to see more and more of that. And hopefully restaurants and different eating establishments being super receptive and encouraging of that too. I know from like the bring your own Tupperware for leftovers perspective, they can't encourage that because of the food safety issues. Like, we don't know how well you wash your Tupperware. And then if you bring home your food from our restaurant, then you get sick and you could sue us. So like you can totally sneak it and do it, but they can't like promote and advertise that.
Yeah, it's odd to me that we haven't figured out that piece of it, because partially once it arrives on my plate, I can do anything I want to that food there. So I can throw so much salt on it that it clogs my arteries and triggers a stroke. But at the same time, they're like, well, the bring your own Tupperware, that feels weird. Like, also there's a limit of the number of Cheddar Bay biscuits we're going to let you take home. So don't bring a suitcase.
What is that limit?
Yeah. I noticed that they added, I've been to Red Lobster twice in my life, just recently on a Friday. So that's why I have a working knowledge of what's going on. But people get so greedy about food that it amazes me. Red Lobster announced in January that they were going to limit the number of Cheddar Bay biscuits to each person who orders an entree to 2 biscuits. And the internet freaked out. They lost it. And within a week, they pulled that policy back immediately from people being like, I've been going to Red Lobster for 40 years and I will eat as many biscuits as I want. And it sounds like Randy Macho Man Savage, but he might have been a big proponent of Red Lobster. But why are we, for them, it's a cost-saving measure, and I'm sure they did plenty of research to say, like, 1 biscuit, not enough, 2 biscuits, fine, 3, overhaul. But people get so greedy. When they go to an all-you-can-eat buffet and they say, I'm going to get my money's worth in this situation, right. They go like, okay, well, what is your money worth versus your time? And, I'll be honest, I've been in that same boat where I go home and I feel sick because I ate too much, which to me is just as wasteful as throwing out the food itself.
Totally.
When I just stuff myself beyond, recognition. So there are changes taking place, but they're certainly not rapid enough for us to, like, our children's generation is going to look back and be like, you guys had a really messed up 30 years there. We don't really understand what happened. It must have had something to do with all of these Fast and Furious movies because it seems to coincide, but there's something going on.
Definitely a correlation there.
Yeah. So what are simple things people can do at home if they want to be better about not being wasteful with food?
Great question. So some of the things that we tell folks are looking at plate size. So we tend to dish up the amount of food based on the size of the plate that we have. So most of the standard dinner plates are 10 inches, and people tend to leave about 25% of their plate or the food on their plate afterwards. So if you simply reduce down to a 7 or 8 inch plate, you have less surface space to pile on the food, and therefore you're not going to hopefully overserve yourself. We really encourage folks to, we talked about the food dating system, just get over that a little bit and don't worry so much about it. Be really thoughtful about how you're managing your fridge. One of the Environmental Protection Agency, what they have said is one of the best things that you can do in your house from a fridge management perspective, because we know that things get tucked into the back and you open a drawer and there's something that's like, oh, that's been in there for months. How did that roll its way to the back? Is designate a shelf in your fridge called the Eat Me First shelf and put a little tag on it so that everyone in the household knows. But all leftovers go there, all perishable foods that need to get eaten. If something needs to go in the next couple of days, just put it there. So when people go, it's that's the first place that you look, making it easy and convenient, right? We need to keep things front of mind. Also love to tell people, if you become equipped in the kitchen, if you have just common culinary skills, good knife skills, good understandings of how flavorings work together, you can get really, really good at not wasting food, because you know that if there is wilted peppers or celery in your fridge, I can saute those with some olive oil and onion and it's going to make a super great stir fry. Or I've got a leftover brisket, whatever, that I got at the restaurant last night. Well, I can cook that up and make some quesadillas with the tortilla shells that I have in my fridge. I know how to be creative in repurposing these foods that might be a little past prime or the leftovers that I have. So those are a few of the things that we like to share with people. Did you guys have any other tips on the food waste?
I challenge myself to not think about okay, I'm gonna go shopping once every 10 days and really stock up on everything, saying, there's plenty of grocery stores in our community. How can I, when I'm out running other errands, meal plan for a few days versus trying to buy in bulk for everything. And I realize there are people who don't have time flexibility in that same way, but something to just kind of be thinking about, or to say like, hey, could I sit down and list out, 5 or 6 meals that I want to make and buy the ingredients for that, or try to, pair up, hey, this meal I could buy, a green pepper and use half of it in this Mexican dish and half of it in, this veggie stir fry. And so for me, that's a couple things I've been trying to do. And it's been fun to kind of experiment and, like Megan said, kind of challenge myself to get creative, to say, okay, there's 2 of us in our house, and if I buy 10 tortilla shells, what does that mean? How could we use them? How can I use them for wraps or something like that? Instead of also buying a loaf of bread to make sandwiches, like, hey, can we just plan to have wraps this week instead? So just kind of, I think also having conversations with the folks in your house about it really helps, because if I'm the only one thinking about it, I couldn't expect my partner to read my mind and be like, oh yeah, that's why you didn't buy bread this week. I'm supposed to have a wrap, So I think some of those conversations and just having more conversations about our food in general can help us be more thoughtful about it.
One other thing, I like just basic principles of like how food ages and becomes like past its prime. So the refrigerator, that 32-degree environment, 32 to 40 degrees, that halts the food degradation process. Like it slows that down. That's why we refrigerate food. Where freezing halts it. Like that 0-degree temperature, it stops any further wilting and whatnot. So almost anything, like if you're not going to use it, throw it in the freezer. It's going to reduce the quality, maybe like cheese, for example. Like cheese that comes out of the freezer, it might have a more like crystally texture, but it works perfectly good in baked dishes. So if there's something in your fridge and you're like, oh, I bought too many tortilla shells, or I bought too much bread, or too much cheese, and I'm not going to be able to get to it this week, just throw it in the freezer and it is there. It will then not rot, not get moldy, all of those things too. So your freezer is like your best friend in the food waste war.
I've worked with the NDSU extension group quite a bit. Yeah, and they have the great saying about like when you're harvesting from your garden and you're like, oh my gosh, we've got too many tomatoes. This year I got aggressive about tomatoes. And they're like, eat the best, preserve the rest.
Yes.
And they said, eat something when it's at its peak ripeness. And if you can't have 20 tomato sandwiches in the next week, take those tomatoes and process them and can them. Or she was like, if you like tomato juice, spin it all up in your food processor and freeze it. And she goes, that way in the middle of the winter, you're going to be like, oh, this is so good. It's directly from my garden and it tastes delicious.
Yeah, definitely don't try to eat all the tomatoes to make sure they don't go to waste. This was a number of years ago, but my garden was like way bumping producing tomatoes, and I did not think that I had time to process them. So I was just like eating tomatoes, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, tomatoes all day. And I got a sore on my mouth from like an acid burn.
Oh no.
But I didn't know what it was. I thought I had an abscessed tooth. So I went to the dentist and was like, I think I have an abscessed tooth. Blah, blah, blah. She like looks at it all and she's like, I don't think that's what it is. Have you had any changes with your diet? And I was like, been eating like 20 tomatoes a day. And she's like, that could be the problem. You have an acid burn in your mouth, you weirdo.
So to me, that says, everything is great in moderation, right? It really is. And that kind of, in a way, feeds in, no pun intended, into, what you guys are trying to do, which is say, gosh, I know it seems like it's convenient to buy this giant bag of bell peppers that's on sale when you're at a big box store. But realistically think, am I going to eat 5 pepper-based meals in the next week to justify getting this many bell peppers?
And so your comment about like the work that we're trying to do. So we, so the food waste is one component of the work we do. But Annie talked quite a bit about building conversations around food. Mm-hmm. And that is something that is like the main platform, excuse me, in terms of what Food of the North is about. So as an organization, we talk about the 3 pillars that we work on. One is ugly food. So that's educating about food waste and trying to bring attention to that issue. The second is we do a project called Little Free Gardens, where we encourage people to grow small gardens in their front yard or front of their business. And then the food that's grown in that garden can be harvested by anyone who wants it or needs it. So kind of creating a place to show that food is something that should be good, nutritious food should be available to all. And then also, it's a nice place for conversations too. People will bump into each other at a little free garden. And I know that's happened for me and you guys both as well. And then the third part of Food of the North is we do a monthly event called First Fridays at B. And the first Friday of each month, we have a different theme that we pick, and we invite people from our local community to speak to that theme. And we really are trying to bring more attention and awareness to all the great work that is happening in our local food community. There is so much good stuff happening in our region when it comes to people that are working to grow nutritious food, to make great food, to address some of these tough environmental health issues that we're dealing with as a population. And we really want to create a space for those people to tell their stories, to share the work that they're doing. We just had our March edition on Friday because it was the first Friday of the month. And we had a conversation about global flavors in Fargo-Moorhead. And we invited 3 gals who are running catering and food trucks. They're originally from Africa, Egypt, and Mexico, and talking about the foods that they're bringing to Fargo and why they care about how this is bringing their culture to our community, and just how much food is such a binding force for families, for conversation, for building relationships. And we've been doing the First Fridays event now for 2.5 years almost. Yeah. So we do these the first Friday of each month. And it's been just amazing to I was just preparing for today. I was just looking back through all of the different conversations we've hosted. And we have an incredible community. We have an incredible community of people that are doing so much good work. And so having this event, giving a place for people to tell those stories and getting our community aware of what they're doing, finding ways to give philanthropically, to volunteer, to have internships, to get jobs with those places has been really cool. So kind of in addressing some of these, we've talked a lot about food waste today, but I think just getting people more connected and aware and appreciating everything that goes into this big, huge food world that we exist in is part of addressing the waste issue, the health issue, the sustainability issue. The more you know, the more you want to be a thoughtful decision maker when it comes to food. So that's been something we've worked a lot on.
Yeah, and I think originally ugly food is something people can kind of get behind. It's easy to understand. Everyone's seen, a wonky potato, or people can kind of understand that. They understand the food waste. Food gets wasted. That's bad. And I think that that's a really, it's an accessible way for people to join more complicated conversations about food. Once people understand that, it's okay, I'm now invested in this. I'm interested. And so I think that when I think about how we've evolved over the past 5 years.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. This is a food conversation that I've wanted to get started for a long time. So we're a diet-obsessed culture, and people are constantly trying new diets all the time. And just recently I had a conversation with someone that said, I hate the word diet because everyone has a diet. Diet essentially is the food you consume. It's not the food you consume to lose weight or to become healthier. So everyone at all times are on a diet. You're on a weight loss program. And so the fact that we've now associated the word diet with this, which is something that's cringeworthy to most of the culture, to think of oh, yeah. I got to go on a diet, and I'm going to try this caveman one that I've been reading about, or I'm going to try this one that's, based off of Queen Elizabeth. It's the Queen Elizabeth diet.
She's living so long, so I want to do that.
But I find that a lot of times food is directly tied to emotions. Oh, yeah. So you watch a movie and someone has a breakup and they are, squirting Ready Whip into their mouth, or they're out there saying, "I'm gonna get back together with them, I'm sure," while they're eating a cheeseburger, whatever it happens to be. I think that's one of the hard things that people have to come to grips with, is the fact that your emotions are tied directly to food, and it was such an odd thing for human beings to at one point associate together. But during the Renaissance, if you were not skin and bones, you were thought of as being healthy. Like, only rich people had the right to be plump. And so being able to eat more, showed that you were higher up in society. And so changing those kind of things, I think, is a tough conversation to have with people, because trying to detach your emotions from eating, I think, is one of the most difficult things for people now, because we're addicted to food.
Oh yeah.
We need it to survive. It's just like breathing. And we've found ways to not consume water anymore. We are consuming pop and coffee and beer and wine at a rate. Well, everything in moderation, Tucker. Everything in moderation. But do you ever find that with your conversations that people say like, oh, yeah, I totally agree with you saying, I totally understand this, but I've got to have my Diet Coke in the afternoon, or I have, like, Fridays are my day to eat a giant submarine sandwich. And it's part of my routine.
So, I'm a dietitian, so diet is part of the title of the profession that we are called. And I completely agree with your comment about the word diet has an extremely negative connotation to it. People hear diet and they think that is a restriction of something, right? Like, that's just not the way you eat. That means that you are restricting yourself to follow this like rigid plan. And so from a dietary perspective, people will every single diet is successful if you can follow it, right? But most people, particularly with highly restrictive forms of diet, people can only do that for a limited period of time and then they revert back. So when we talk about getting folks to make dietary changes that are good for their health and good for the health of the planet, it really has to be a lifestyle change. And it has to be something that you can do every single day, and not looking at it as something as I'm depriving myself, I'm restricting myself so that in a month I'm going to Mexico and I'm going to look this good or whatever, because more than likely that's just all going to come back right after, and you'll be right back where you started, and maybe then some. So one of the things that from a health perspective is, I think one of the most well-researched diets, but it's not really a diet, is the Mediterranean diet. It is the diet that people consume in countries in Italy and Greece and surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. But it's not so much a you need to eat this, not that. It is a lifestyle of consuming moderate portions of plant-based foods, healthy oils, red wine in moderation, chocolate. I mean, you hear a lot about the Mediterranean diet, but I think one of the things that makes the Mediterranean diet a very successful for people long term is that it tastes really good, right? And if you're eating a diet where you have a grilled chicken breast and steamed broccoli every single day for 2 months, by the end of that, you're going to be like, ugh, this is so boring. This is no flavor. Whereas like the Mediterranean diet is like extremely flavor focused, extremely nutritious, but like it tastes really good. So that's something that I think leading with showing people ways to make changes that don't feel like you're depriving yourself. And then also talking about the rewards you're going to receive from making those choices over the long term, from a longevity perspective, from a reduced risk of chronic disease perspective, all the above.
They always say, so I was on Jenny Craig for a while. I did an endorsement deal with them, and I lost 60 pounds on it. Like, dang. I couldn't believe it. But it is incredibly wasteful because everything is packaged in its own thing that has to get thrown away. And really, when it boils down to it, it's portion control, right? Mm-hmm. Portion control, portion control, portion control. Mm-hmm. So when it's all made for you, you don't have to worry about like, well, okay, well, there's 4 pieces of bread left and it'd be shameful to only leave 2 in the things. Well, I'll just use up all the bread.
But when you show people like what portions are actually supposed to look like, because as a dietitian, we have food models that we show people like, this is actually a portion of mashed potatoes. Right. This is actually a portion of meat. And they're like, what? I do 5 times that when I eat that. So, getting some perspective in terms of what a portion size actually looks like, and then realizing how warped our portions are in this country. And I think when you go other places in the world, I know that our American foodways and the way that we consume and produce and portion foods is infiltrating into other countries. But there is, you see, at least from when I've traveled abroad, I see that there is definitely smaller portions in other places in the world. We are definitely the largest, and our weight reflects that too as a society.
Well, it's, if you go to Japan and you eat sushi in Japan, you're not going to get 50 pieces of this thing. It's a much smaller size.
They don't have the all-you-can-eat sushi in Japan.
If they do, I didn't find it. But it drives me just absolutely insane to listen to people who are just like, nope, I'm doing what I'm going to do. I'm going to stay with what I'm going to do, and it's tough.
It is tough, and like. I go, because as a dietitian, I think a lot about this. And like, I think we put a ton of pressure on the individual, like have willpower, be stronger, make good choices. Like it's all on you. And then there's the other area of looking at it and saying like, we make a really difficult food environment for people to navigate to. We are heavy. Like when you drive down the road, it is fast food restaurants, and I can spend $3 and buy 3,000 calories going through there, and it's all going to taste super good and it's super easy. So like there's this one piece, and there's like a huge industry built around the weight loss industry is billions of dollars, telling people like all the choices that you should make as the individual. And then there's like the policy, environment, system side that says like, let's not make it so hard for people to make good choices. Let's make it easier for people let's make grocery stores more easily located so people can go and buy fresh produce. Let's consider, I mean, this is not radical, but like, let's consider subsidizing the cost of fruits and vegetables so it's cheaper for people to buy those foods. Let's consider adding taxes onto soda so they're not as cheap that you have to, like, it might give you a little check and say like, oh, dang, I don't need that soda because it costs quite a bit. And the same is true of like being physically active too. Let's make it easier for people to walk places versus jumping in your car and driving everywhere. So I am a big fan of thinking about the systems and the environment that we live in, because I think that we make so many mindless decisions on a daily basis. We try to be thoughtful consumers and thoughtful decision makers, but so much of what we're doing is we're just on autopilot. And let's try to make that autopilot steer us in healthier directions versus constantly steering us in ways that are detrimental to our health.
Have you been to New York City since like post the soda size
Did you guys
regulation?
Follow that? This was a number of years ago, and Mayor Bloomberg at the time was trying to restrict the sizes of sodas that people could buy, so you could only buy a 12-ounce soda. And people were like livid.
They lost their minds. It was just like the Cheddar Bay Biscuit scandal.
When you were talking about that, I was thinking about the soda thing. When people feel like their choices are being limited or restricted or in some way controlled, they lose their shit.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, they
there
do.
you go. Well done in dropping the S word in there.
Sorry about that.
But to me, there's, I'll go to a gas station and say like, okay, I'm going to get a pop while I'm here, right? And I want a fountain pop because it tastes better. Well, the smallest size you can get is a 32 ounce. It's enormous. And the biggest you can get is a 64 ounce.
Who is drinking that much liquid anyway?
Right. How many times are you going to the bathroom? Are you guys Parks and Rec fans?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, huge.
That one where Leslie's trying to put the soda tax?
Yep.
The child size?
Yep.
It's literally the size of a
child. I also think in a weird way, and follow me on this train of thought, I think because we're, America, where bigger is better, right? Especially in Texas. I think that cup holders have become ridiculously sized in our vehicles.
Yeah.
And the number of cup holders, there is a Subaru. Yeah. Well, there's a Subaru.
I did not prepare to talk about cup holders today.
Okay. Well, good. I'm glad. This has got you journalism. There's a Subaru SUV that comes standard with 17 cup holders in it.
How many seats does it have?
There's 8. So that's 2 beverages per person, and they are big enough to hold like one of those 64 ounce like sodas. And that to me is just a clear indicator that we have lost control over what we expect out of people. Now, back in the day, and this is taking a hard left here real quick, but my mom had a big old van, right? Like, so when we were kids and there's a carpool and everything, so we had this giant van, and my mom would grocery shop once every month for the lake. So we'd drive down to the lake, and then we'd have all the food that we'd have out there, and we'd eat out there. And she had a huge garden, which was nice. So May is when we'd start going down to the lake, and she shopped beginning of May. But by the last day of school, her van smelled so bad. We couldn't figure out what it was. And so finally, we were like, we couldn't drive around without having all the windows down. Something was wrong. Something was rotten in Denmark.
Yeah.
So we tear apart this entire van. Like, we remove everything that we can pull out of this thing. And finally, they take the back bucket seat out and wedged underneath here. So even that if you had gone and like felt underneath, you wouldn't feel it. It was almost in the mechanics. Was a package of pork chops that she had bought. Now, this is May and starting to get warm, right? And we were a driveway parking family. And I remember my mom's disappointment wasn't that the van smelled so bad, but it was like, I can't believe that this 4-pack of pork. She was like, this was $10.
Yeah.
$10. It just went to waste. I can't believe it.
Those pork chops.
Meanwhile, I'm like, we can't even throw this in the garbage at the house. We gotta take this straight to the landfill. Like, we gotta get rid of this. We're gonna have bears coming out of the woods to take care of this. But it was the first time I ever remember my mom being disappointed in herself for making a food choice and letting it go to waste.
So your mom was pretty thoughtful about...
Very thoughtful, yeah. And she was one of those people, too, who would be more... my mom mastered portion control back in the day because she's like, I don't really want to eat that much. So she would, if we were having steak, she'd be like, okay, so here's one steak and I'll cut it into fourth. Mm-hmm. You know, everyone will have a piece of it. And unfortunately, my dad loved to drink beer while he grilled, and so that steak would get smaller and smaller as we all ate it super well done. It was pretty much shoe leather. Probably should have stopped at the second MGD, Dad. But
it took a while to pick up on the MGD there.
I did not know that steak came in anything other than gray until I was an adult. And then I was like, whoa, this is amazing.
No wonder people like steak.
Yeah, it's great. Same thing with burgers, too. Like, they're not hard to bite into. What?
I think, like, listening to you talk about this, like, I think that's one of the main things that I love about the work that we do with Food of the North is because people tell so many stories, and like so much of our connection to people is based around food. Like we remember people for the way they cook things. We remember people for how they left pork chops sitting in the back of their car or whatever it might be. But like food is just such a universally binding part of the human experience. And it is just such a connecting point of people. And not to get like too deep into issues in the world today, but like we're a very divided place in this world, and we are like, we just need more shared humanity. And I feel like food is one way that we can build shared humanity. Like thinking about the conversation we had with First Fridays on Friday, these women, and like they all spoke about like people might have impressions about them as non-native Americans or native to the United States, and might have a negative perception of their culture or negative perception of just being an immigrant into this country. But when they taste their food, they're like, oh my gosh, I love this. Tell me more. And it's just like, it's a point for beginning a conversation and building shared connection. So yeah, food's a powerful thing.
Did anyone here go to the Hot Dish Festival by any chance?
I didn't make it.
I missed it.
So the folks who run the Egyptian food truck.
That was one of our speakers.
Yep. They were a part of it. First hot dish to go. That was the first one that they ran out of because everyone's like, you gotta go try this one. Yeah.
Oh.
And I am so thankful for that because I grew up in Fargo, and I remember when your options for cuisine outside of the standard American fare was Olive Garden or the Mexican Village.
Yo.
And I'm not throwing any shade at those places. I'm sure they do wonderful business, and I'm sure they enjoy whatever fest is going on at the Olive Garden right now. But it is great to me because we, like you said, we have a great community, and we are really at a time now where you can have some amazing food adventures, and we're really lucky to have that.
It's truly like, it is so enriching to our community to have that too. Like, I mean, it's wonderful to be able to taste all those foods, but to have that cultural expression and opportunity to learn about all these different people and all these different places in the world, because you can have that shared dining experience where you can go in and taste what people eat in Egypt and taste what the flavors are of Mexico. Like, food is such an entry point to that understanding and learning and just general enjoyment. Like, it's I mean, I think once you start down that path of learning, exploring, and enjoying those things, you're like, how can people not be into this and not love this? Because it's such a neat part of life and a neat way to just learn more about the world around you.
One of my New Year's resolutions this year was to say, if I go to a restaurant I've been to many times, I am not allowed to order my usual dish. I have to, expand my horizons. And I didn't realize I loved eggplant parmesan as much as I do, because I've always been a chicken parm kind of guy. And so they're like, try the eggplant. It's great. Or try gnocchi, or try something that you don't normally try, and you'll find your food, your adventure of food is really building. I go to California quickly with my wife, and my wife's family they schedule everything around food, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we know we're going to get up at this time because we want to be on the road by X o'clock, and that factors in where we're going to have breakfast.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, so the plan is we're going to make reservations at this place. And so Saturday is just leading up to like, okay, well, it's 2 hours to the reservation. What are we going to do? I don't know. Do you think they could get us in early? Well, let's check. And so I find that food becomes a thing really that does bind a lot of people together. And great food. You see it in the movie Ratatouille, where it's just a love letter to just enjoying food and realizing that it's more than just sustaining your life. There is so much power to it.
Anyone can cook.
Yeah, anyone can cook.
It's so great. Yes.
And I think that, that's a great tool like for kids too, because I see kids who are starting to get into this cooking aspect and they want to be a part of it. And you should welcome kids into the kitchen. I think that's a huge, huge aspect.
Goodness, this is such a great lead into.
There you go.
Our next First Fridays is cooking with kids.
Really?
That's the conversation we're having. So Family Wellness, they do a cooking program that goes all across the Fargo-Moorhead and West Fargo School District, teaching fifth graders how to cook, basic knife skills, it was interesting when we met with the instructors to kind of talk about the conversation. They're like, you would be surprised, just the things that kids have no idea. And just packaging, how do you open certain things? How do you just really basic things in the kitchen? And things that you take for granted when you become comfortable in a kitchen, but how to turn on the stove, where to stand, how to do things safely. They're just introducing kids to all of those basics, and then also really fun recipes that they make with the kids too. So we have a couple of folks from Family Wellness that are presenting, and then a mom is going to talk about how the experience was for her kids. And she's got a unique story because her son Carter actually won the kids cooking, the Healthy Kids Cooking Challenge when the Obamas had that challenge.
Cool.
So he went to Washington D.C., met President Obama and Michelle Obama. He was on the Food Network, Chop Jr. He's like,
I remember this. Yeah.
Yeah. So his mom is speaking. He's got to be in school, so he can't be there for our event. But
I was going to write him an excuse note, dear teacher, this is important. Let him come tell us, because I want to talk about how you got to meet the Obamas.
Yeah, everyone's just gonna that'll be the whole conversation. Be like, so what was it like meeting the Obamas?
Yeah.
Do you when it comes to cooking with kids, have you ever seen somebody who is well on their way to being an adult try to use a can opener for the first time?
They have some great photos of mangled cans that they were like, you would not guess.
Yeah.
They're like, guess how old this student was who did this? High school, going to college soon. And I was like, oh no, what is the world that we're living in? But I think we take it for granted when we become comfortable. And if we don't, share with our kids how to do those things, we don't involve them in the process, they have no idea that there is a process. When we were meeting with the family wellness folks, they talked about handing a kid a yogurt that still had the lid on, and they just stared at it because they'd never been handed a cup of yogurt that still had like the foil lid, and they didn't know what to do with it. And so I think making sure that we're thinking through all of that, where I think sometimes we're trying to make it easy for people, we're trying to be quick about it, we forget that we have a responsibility to teach people how they're consuming their food and how to be thoughtful and what goes into it.
Well, they said like one of them, they gave kids bananas, and kids, like, their mom had always peeled their banana and gave them a peeled banana. They didn't know how to peel a banana. So they had to teach like a 5th grader how to peel a banana. Too bad Annie wasn't there to teach them how to do it with their toes.
Hands or toes, take your choice.
But
we used to shuck peas as a kid. And I remember like telling someone recently, like they came over to our house and like, oh, and would you, like you want to help? Like, could you shuck these peas? And they're like, what? And I had to show them, and I was like, I'm helping, like one of my peers understand this. And so like halfway through, they're like, so they do this for every, is everything out of the garden? Because don't you do the same thing with corn? I was like, okay, well, let's take a trip to the garden and I'll walk you through it and just show you, like these things you can eat right away. These things you can do like this. And like you can eat the peas while they're still in the pod. But for this dish, it wouldn't make sense because it's a summer pasta dish and you want to see all the peas in there.
Nice.
It adds the color.
the pop of color.
And so at the end of it, they're like, this is amazing. I'm going to start my garden next year. And so as soon as the weather gets nice this year, they're going to put a garden into their
That's
house.
awesome.
And so I was like, I feel like I've done my part.
You
in
totally
this.
have.
Yeah.
Kudos.
But I have a feeling I'm going to go over there all the time and be like, whoa, what did, like, I can't believe you put the carrots right next to the peppers. Like, that was the dumbest thing you could do. Oh, guys.
Kind of going back to your stuff about cooking with kids. So one of the, like, in terms of like addressing some of these big issues that we have, like establishing positive behavior or positive food choices, food knowledge, food skills with kids is huge, right? So that they can go forward and be equipped to make good choices. I used to do a regular cooking segment on North Dakota Today, and I did one with my niece Harper, who's 5 years old, and we made a black bean hummus together. So it was black beans, garlic, little olive oil, some cumin. That sounds really good. It was very good. But like, so she was like doing it all with me and like pouring it all together and like pushing the food processor. And when you looked at it, like when it came out of the food processor, it looked like dirt, like it looked like mud because it was like kind of wet and had that. But like, I think that if you were to just give something like that to a kid and say, hey, eat this, they'd look at it and be like, no. But like having her involved in the whole process, like at the very end, she like took a big spoon, put it in her mouth, and she's like, this is delicious. Like was super like proud of herself for doing it, that she felt accomplished, that she had learned something, that she'd been involved, and then making her more apt to try it too, because she saw everything that went into it and she had a hand in making it too. So I think there's a lot with getting kids to eat healthier foods if you can get them involved in making the foods too.
Oh, I think absolutely. And, it's weird that there are some foods that just have a stigma about them. Like kids like, oh, you got to eat your broccoli. You got to eat your broccoli. Why is this such a chore to get kids to eat broccoli? Why did it become something in pop culture where it's like, oh, kids don't ever want to eat that? And be like, nope, I think we got to go. And also acknowledging that your food tastes change as you grow older. As a kid, mushrooms tasted gross to me. I hated mushrooms. Now I will find any reason to put a mushroom in anything.
A colleague of mine who did a lot of teaching with kids and food literacy and cooking and whatnot, she said that she had the once a year rule, that your tastes change over time. So once a year, if you think you didn't like something, try it again the next year. And maybe by then you'll like it. But it wasn't like, I think it's interesting to think about how we talk with kids about things that they say they don't like. And the more you push on kids to try something, the more they will sometimes push back and be like, no, I hate it. So when I'm working with kids and like trying to make new foods, especially if I'm teaching like a large group of kids, if there is a very vocal kid who is like trying to be very anti whatever food it is that we're cooking with, whether it be broccoli or something that you say are like the stigma foods with kids, I try to not give that attention as much as possible, because so much of that is an attention seeking thing. And if they get the attention that they want and they get like kind of all this like, no, please try it. Come on, just one bite. They're like, I feel like it's feeding into what they are hoping to achieve with that. Where like a lot of times if I'm teaching a group of kids and there's someone like that, I'm like, okay, we're not talking about that now. Moving on to like the kids that are having a positive experience, giving that time and attention and not getting over consumed by the single individual. Because a lot of times the peers will influence the other, so they'll follow the herd. And like you said, over time, tastes change. And from a food, like establishing food preference with kids, exposure is the number one thing. And especially with some of those like more difficult foods, we like put the bitter foods all together in a category, which would be like the broccoli, your deep leafy greens. Those inherently that's not a flavor profile that kids like. It takes multiple times of trying that because from a human evolutionary perspective, we were hardwired to be more apprehensive towards bitter foods because bitter foods are more likely to carry things that could potentially be harmful to our human health. So humans are naturally wired to we like sweet and salty. We're more apprehensive on the bitter foods. So so giving kids multiple opportunities to see, smell, taste, and touch foods is really big on building good preference.
I also think that we try and say like, okay, well, you don't like broccoli, but you love cheese. So why don't I melt a ton of cheese and put it on top of the broccoli? And so we'll just mask whatever it is that you didn't like.
Totally.
Oh, yeah. As a kid, I didn't like squash at all. And so my mom, would have it because we grew it in the garden. And, she would do things like put in butter and maple syrup into acorn squash to make it taste better. And I still hated it. And I remember to this day, I was probably 6 or 7. And I was like, I'm going to show her. She'll never make me eat squash again. So I pretended to throw up, went running to the bathroom very dramatically, gagging and all these things. And she just I came back to the table. She's like, you got to finish it, And so I think it was one of those things that just, I was trying so hard to not have to do it that today, now I'm I buy squash at the grocery store if I haven't grown enough. And I'm I got to make squash soup. And probably today I have to clean out my freezer. And I know I have a big thing of squash soup that I made last fall. And so it's really funny, those really dramatic things when we really push on kids that they do.
Kids are weird.
Kids are weird.
And so I talk to a lot of parents who are dealing with food phobias, picky eating, and all these concerns. My kid will only eat chicken nuggets. Help me. And so there's this woman named Ellen Satter, and she's a childhood feeding expert. That's what her entire career is based on. And she has a theory called the divisions of responsibility. And what she tells parents is that as the parent, you are responsible for the meal. You're responsible for the what, the where, and the when. And your child is responsible for the if and how much. So you as the parent say, okay, we are eating dinner tonight. We are having squash and chicken and broccoli and mashed potatoes and bread. And that is what's on the table. And then you presented the kind, we're going to eat at the table. We're eating at 6:00. The kid comes to the table. They could just eat bread. They could just eat chicken. They can have a little bit of everything, but that is the choice that is available to them. So they get responsible for the if and the how much. And then, but that's it. There isn't snacks after that. There isn't this unlimited fruit snacks and Cheetos and whatever. If that is the meal that they have. And parents will freak out because they'll be like, well, they only ate a couple bites of chicken. Kids are not going to starve themselves. We are hardwired as humans to want to survive. So there is no chance that a child is just going to not eat to the point of.
Right. A hunger strike is a very difficult thing to maintain.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So eventually they will start to eat what you are presenting to them. If you become a short order cook and you're whipping up everything that your child wants, a friend of mine, she's like, I don't know what to do. My kids will only eat hot dogs and chicken nuggets. I'm like, because you've created that. That's that's been the fallback of everything. You'll make a meal and then they don't eat that. So you make them the chicken nuggets. They know they're going to get that. You've got to start giving some tough love and saying, this is what you're eating, kid. And if not, I don't have kids, so I know that it's parents are probably out there this woman doesn't know what she's talking about. She doesn't have children. But I watch my niece and nephew all the time. And when I'm making food for them, when I'm babysitting, if they don't eat what's there, I package it all up. I put it in a Tupperware in the fridge and they say they want a snack. Here, you can have the leftovers from what was your lunch, but you're not getting other stuff that's coming out of there. And if they're truly hungry, they will eat that. Or if it's just they want to have the sweet snack or the salty snack or whatever it is that.
Please don't send us to Aunt Megan's anymore.
They love me. I think.
As a kid,
I do sound like a wretched aunt, don't I?
they'll eat it and they'll like it, or they'll starve.
It's like Ron Harper on the TV show. Prove that she will eat things, and she does love you.
Yeah, she's. Oh man. Okay.
You're gonna watch this TED Talk, and you're gonna walk away with a more broad understanding. As a kid, I hated mustard, and as an adult, I hate mustard.
Oh.
It is the mustard and really truly mayo are two things I cannot stand, and I will not eat whatsoever.
Yeah.
And people try and trick me into it, and that pisses me off. And I said, listen, however I'm wired, I'm Scottish on both sides of my family. You know, maybe it was the time I was raised. I don't know what it is, but that is the worst thing you can do to me, is to present me with something that has mustard in it. And I will ask, and I will kindly decline it. And I will like not touch the potato salad on my plate, and maybe say like, Jill, who's my wife, would you like the rest of this potato salad? Because I will not be eating it. And
what do you got against mayo and mustard? Like, is it like what's the issue?
I like oil and I like eggs, so you'd think I'd like mayo, but I think it's the overuse of it in our culture.
Okay.
So like, if I have a sandwich where there's just maybe if always it had been just a little bit of mayo, but I think mayo, people treat it like a cheese sandwich is cheese and mayo, and it's almost as thick as the bread, and it just it makes my stomach
so light
queasy.
Mayo you're okay
No,
with?
I'm not. No, yeah.
So because it's been too overused, you've got no place
I'm
for
mayo
it.
averse, but I now like I have people say like, well, you like ranch dressing. A lot of ranch dressings are mayo based, and I'm like, yep, that's true, but they disguise it to taste like ranch. Like Hidden Valley does a good job balancing that out, and if I can see it's clearly just mayonnaise with like a ranch packet in it, like it's hard for me to like get behind that. But mustard is a 100% no go. So like one time when my wife made sloppy joes, and I said, did you put mustard in this? Because it's a very common thing to put mustard into sloppy joe recipes. Man, I can't eat manwich out of the can because it's got mustard in it. And she's like, oh, no. I was able to identify just from the look of the pan, and I'm like, you're lying to me. I know you're lying to me, and I am not going to eat that.
So not even as a condiment, like as an ingredient in things.
Even a small amount will just drive me crazy.
Goodness.
And I understand that I am missing so much because we're in a mustard renaissance right now with all the different options there are.
Like you go to Worst Beer Hall and there's like 8 different mustards on the table.
Stone ground.
I learned to make mustard at summer camp with Unglued. And so we actually, this year for Oktoberfest when we were tailgating, we were like, we are making mustards. So I'm like, we're making a tangy dill mustard and a stone ground mustard and a honey mustard. And then we're going to do our own like twist on a classic yellow. And I too hated mustard for a long time until I started experimenting with other mustards, because no knock to like the plain yellow mustard lovers of the world, but like, ugh.
Yeah, it just doesn't cut it for you.
No.
See, to me, it doesn't matter. And like, everyone's like, oh, come on, you haven't tried. This is the best mustard. You got to try this. It's good mustard. And I'm like, no, I just don't want to eat it.
Mustard.
I just don't want to eat it. Just please.
You're cool with ketchup.
I'm very cool with ketchup. I love it. It's a building block
Ketchup
of
and
life
ranch,
up here.
Buffalo sauce, barbecue,
Yep.
all good there.
There's not another condiment. So my mom, as a kid, made this thing that she learned from her mom, which we call onion goop. And essentially, it is mustard, mayo, and like chopped white onion that you put on top of a ham, like a pit ham sandwich. So if you have leftover ham from like 4th of July, and there's no direct recipe, it's by color. So like, this is the color you're looking to maintain while you make it. And she would make it by the vat full because it was just a huge hit for everyone would come over and put it on. And I'm like, well, that recipe is going to die with me. I'm going to take that thing to the grave.
You just shared it with the webs.
Well, you don't know the color, do you?
Oh, right. You didn't give us those.
I contributed to a cookbook this last fall, and I put that in there, and I described what the color should be. And
What is the color?
Pac-Man color. So that's what you're trying to go for. So it's much more like mayonnaise-y sticky than mustardy, but the mustard is really what gives it the flavor
I'm
kick.
envisioning people like looking at your recipe and then Googling Pac-Man and then like holding up the picture of Pac-Man.
Yep.
Like, is that what you hoped for when you wrote the recipe?
Absolutely.
That situation
Yep.
would be happening
Like,
all over.
why is there an abundance of Pac-Man Googling? But to me, like, that recipe represents something kind of we've talked about here, which is it's a part of history, right? Mm-hmm. And so even though I hate 2 out of the 3 ingredients in this thing, I know how important it was that like that was a go-to for us. Mm-hmm. If we had ham, so after Easter, after whatever holiday it was, if we had ham, I knew that there would be a container of onion goop in the fridge. And it would make me sick to my stomach just to look at it. But
it brings you right back.
It does. It really does.
Right?
It really does.
Like, I think that like certain foods, music, like there's just these different things that can bring us right back to a certain time and place. And yeah, food transcends time. And it connects us with people that we might have lost in the past. And it's a way to remember them. I know our First Friday speakers, they all talked about their mothers, and the conversation we just had on Friday, the gals who are doing the different restaurants in Fargo, but like, and some of them have lost their mothers, and like being able to cook this food is a way to remember those family members and like pay an homage to that person and how important they were to you, because that was a shared experience that you had together and a way to let their legacy live on.
One of my favorite television shows is called The Middle, and it's got Patricia Heaton in it, who is the wife from Everyone Loves Raymond, and it's about a family in Indiana, and they're a convenience-based family, and their daughter is always nostalgic, and she's trying to create things that she can be nostalgic for later on in life. And so there's their Thanksgiving episode is big every year, and she said, listen, I want to start a tradition where my mom and I make an apple pie together every single year. And they had never made an apple pie before, and they're like, there's a lot that goes into this whole thing. And so she's trying to she like hurts her fingers peeling the apples, and so she's trying to peel it like with her chin, but then she peels part of her chin by accident. And they let the dough sit for so long that they have to start over again because it's risen really high. And at the end of it, the mother does this funny thing where she goes, from my mother to me, from me to you. And she pulls out like a Marie Callender's frozen apple pie, and she goes, 45 minutes, 350. We're going to be great. And I remember, there were those moments where my mom swung for the fences and it just didn't work. Yeah. And my dad knew 2 bachelor meals, stuffed pork chops and boiled sausage. And so if my mom was out of town for the week, I'm like, well, we're having stuffed pork chops twice this week. Gross.
But like, that's one of the things that I think is beautiful about like food as a connecting point, because it can be like, so on my 2 sides of the family, my dad's side of the family, my grandmother was like the garden, preserving, like everything was homemade, home cooked. Like she was just like an ultra food person. So I had that experience with her. My other grandma was the total convenience grandma. Like Cool Whip is like the food that I remember with Grandma Dorothy. Like she always had Cool Whip, and we always got to have Cool Whip there. And like, I look back at both of those experiences so fondly. Like they're extremely different food experiences. Like, but food, regardless of its I don't want to say pretentiousness, but what am I trying to say here? Regardless of how heavily involved you are, like food, even in the like a simple like opening up a cool container and letting you have a bite of that out of the fridge can be something that is special in a connection. One of my good friends, when he got married, his wife said, "Okay, well, we're gonna have a ham for this holiday." It was the first one they were hosting, and so they got the ham, they put it in the pan, and she cut the top of it off. And she called it the ham butt. And then just took the top of the ham and put it next to the other part in the baking dish and put it in the oven. And he goes, well, that's weird. What do you do that for? And she goes, oh, it's a family trick. This is how it cooks really well. Like, you're going to love it. And he tasted it. He's like, tastes like regular ham to me. And she's like, well, it's a family tradition, and it's a secret that we figured out years ago. And so her mom was over for that holiday, and they said, well, Rose, why do you cut the top off? And she goes, well, my mother, Erica's grandmother used to cut the top off, the ham butt, and then roast on the side. I think the juices come out of the top a little bit easier, and then it's kind of like a volcano, like basting itself the whole time. Sure. So that was Thanksgiving. Christmas rolls around.
and Grandma's there. And they're like, Grandma, like, how did you figure out this amazing secret to making the best ham ever? And she goes, I just never had a pan big enough.
Yeah.
So I cut the top off. And so that became this secret family tradition that had nothing to do with the quality. It just had to do with the size of your Pyrex.
Functional decision.
Yeah. Well, listen, I've eaten up a lot of your time. Pun fully intended there.
Nicely done.
And as we wrap this up, if people are interested in this, if they are just very excited now, how are they going to find you? Social media, events, what are they doing?
You can find us on social media, Food of the North on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or our website, foodofthenorth.com. They can also attend First Fridays on Friday, April 3rd at 8 a.m.
Looking for volunteers? Are you looking for people to reach out to say, we'd love for you to come to our community? Who do you want to engage with you right now?
So our First Fridays event, we really try to use that as a place for people who are interested in volunteering. The nature of our work, we don't have a ton of volunteer opportunities because most of our projects are pretty small in terms of needs of human capital. But we have so many partner organizations that are attending First Fridays and sharing announcements at the beginning of our event that they're looking for volunteers to help in the community gardens. They've got a community cafe coming up and they're looking for server volunteers. So we really try to think of First Fridays as a great entry point for people who are interested in volunteering. Come there, you can meet all these different people that are doing amazing things in the food community who all need volunteers and help with their different projects. That was one of our big things with starting First Fridays is we wanted to create a place for people to connect in and find ways to support all the different food endeavors in the community.
Very cool.
And if you're looking for a great gift, you can order a little free garden online, have it shipped. I got one for my birthday last year. Finally convinced my husband we should have one. So Mother's Day, Father's Day, they're coming up. Could be great options. Little Free Garden is just a fun, easy project where there's not a lot of maintenance, not a lot of things to do with it, and really easy to purchase.
And the goal for that is to put it into some place where the community has direct access. So your front yard, in front of your business, not somewhere behind fences.
Right.
No, then it's a private garden.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we all have them. We all have them in our front yards. Churches have them. Businesses have them. But yeah, putting it in a place where it's available for anybody to harvest and use the food as they need.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Gia, Annie, Megan. It's been a blast. I definitely, if you guys ever want to come back and talk about anything else again, please, please, please do.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank
This has
you.
been so fun. We'll be back.
A huge thanks to Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty for sponsoring this podcast. Folks, if you're looking to buy or sell a home, contact Natalie Deutsch today because Natalie Deutsch is not only a previous podcast guest, she's somebody who's going to care enough to sell your property for top dollar. She's also going to find you the best price possible if you're purchasing a new home. Last year on average, Natalie earned her clients $4,000 over list price on their homes and sold them faster than the market average. On average, Natalie's selling a home every 3.74 days. That's 2 homes a week. Those numbers don't lie. Find out why Natalie is one of the top agents in this entire market. Get a hold of her today, Natalie at hatchrealtyfm.com. You can also call 701-388-9338 or go on to livefargomoorhead.com. That's livefargomoorhead.com. Read all of her amazing reviews, and then listen to her episode of JJ Meets World. Thanks again to Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode of JJ Meets World and would like to help us continue to produce 2 new episodes every week, you can donate to our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/JJ Meets World and donate today. Even as little as $1 a month can go a long way. Visit our website at www.jjmeetsworld.com or hit up our social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the sites the kids are using these days. If you'd like to stay up to date on new episodes of JJ Meets World, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or wherever you consume the podcast that you love. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by checking out www.moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, go to linebenders.com, and you can find direct contact info for JJ. Mama's little baby loves shortening. Mama's little baby loves shortening bread.